Hello and welcome to this edition of Turnaround Marriage Live. We are going to be talking about a subject that we hear about all the time, and quite frankly, it's something that we've walked through ourselves, and we're going to be talking about the subject of avoidance. Avoidance, maybe that's a subject that you've been avoiding for far too long in your own marriage, or maybe you realize that it's been one of those issues that just keeps coming up for you, your spouse, or for both of you. And if that describes you, then you are exactly in the right place that you need to be today. So yes, guys, what we did is we just did a poll in our private Facebook group and asked the question, what in your experience in your marriage or with people that you know is the most common vicious cycle in Christian marriages? And so I want to first of all make sure that if you're not part of our Facebook group, just search Turnaround Marriage on Facebook. You're going to find both our coaching page and you're going to find our private Facebook group. You just have to apply to join us, just like one question or two, and then you'll join us. We do all kinds of encouragement and resourcing in there. You don't want to miss anything. Also, if you are checking us out on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe, and we'd appreciate if you would share our videos too. And so, yeah, again, we asked that question, what in your experience, guys, is either for yourself or friends that you know is the most common vicious cycle? And we talked about the number one just yesterday. So if you missed that, make sure you check that out. But the number two, which is a huge one, is avoidance. And so let's dive into that for a few moments today. Why is it that so many couples, that this is one of the vicious cycles that they get in? In fact, number two, certainly in our non-scientific group, is certainly the case of their own experience, but we've also found that to be true with a number of couples, hundreds of couples literally that we have talked to. One of the main reasons is they simply don't want to fight. You know, as Christians, you know, there's this understanding that we ought to be honorable people. Obviously, we need to treat the other person with kindness and love. And so there is this belief that if we have a fight or an argument, that means that we're less than, that we're not being appropriate. And certainly there are ways to navigate that in an unhealthy way, but there's also a way that you can manage disagreements and misunderstandings and different perspectives in a very honorable way. But it is one of the reasons that people get stuck is they simply just don't want to go into into fighting. They don't want to be arguing. And oftentimes what that looks like is they're not dealing with the issues. They're sweeping them under the carpet. And what happens if you don't deal with them? Well, maybe if it's one little thing, not that much. But if it's days or weeks or months or even years, what's going to happen? But there's going to be tons of built up frustration. Sometimes it can get so bad that we're not even identifying what it is that we're actually that frustrated about. It's just that we're frustrated with the other person. Another reason is people just simply don't want to deal with it right now. Like maybe it's more fun to go watch TV, or maybe you can avoid the subject because you just don't want to deal with it, and it's going to take you a while to navigate it. And so you either one of you or both of you are committed to just not dealing with it right now. You'd rather just go have fun. You'd rather just go read a book or be on social media or do anything to get away from it. A lot of times it can look more honorable. It was this way for Rachel and I for many years, that we just want to go spend time with our kids. Well, that's a great thing to do, of course. But what happens is if you're not dealing with it, it again just starts to build and it starts to accumulate. And pretty soon there's an animosity that builds up over time. It can also look like just simply not wanting to be petty. It's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I'm just going to move on. And if you're not dealing with that either internally or with the other person, and it's still there, even if you didn't want to be petty, you're still being petty because you're holding on to it. Sometimes it looks like for Christian couples, they really, really just want to honor Jesus. Like it can come from really pure motives in the sense that like they just want for this marriage to look, for lack of a better term, just kind of like a storybook. They want it just to be pretty, and they just want to honor Jesus because they don't want to fight. And God gave you this husband, God gave you this wife, and you just want to honor him. And it starts off that way. But if you're not dealing with the conflict, or if, and just to be frank, a husband and wife, a man and woman, despite what our culture says, are different. We're wired differently. We're created differently. both in the image of God, no question, but we see things differently. So there's going to be inadvertent times that we can't even help it, that we're going to see things differently by virtue of the way that we were made. And so even in trying to honor Jesus, there are going to be situations where you see situations differently because of the way Jesus made you. And if you're not dealing with them and you're in this vicious cycle of avoiding that subject, it is going to be very destructive. It could also be a huge thing that was definitely true for Rachel and I. And it could look an awful lot like the avoiding and the pursuing. It can look an awful lot like, I just don't want to deal with this now. One person says that, they step away, and then the other person starts saying, well, I really want to talk about this. And it's like that one person is really trying to avoid it. And the reason might be pure. The reason might also be that they are just not wanting to deal with it now. It can look like a lot of different things, but at the heart of the matter, one person at least, or possibly even two, is just stepping away, is just avoiding it. And the other person believes that they need to pursue. The Gottman Research Institute talks about this as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, one of the four really, really destructive things in the context of a marriage, and they call it stonewalling. Stonewalling is where one or two persons put up a wall and they say, we're not going to talk about these things. And those walls can look really velvet covered. Those walls can be like, well, Jesus wouldn't want us to disagree. Those walls can look like, we just don't want to fight. We'd rather be in love. We'd rather have fun. Well, that sounds really good. But the reality of the situation is you have put up a wall in your heart between you and your spouse. And if you do not fix this, this is one of the four destructive horsemen of the apocalypse that research says is absolutely going to destroy your marriage. And so, guys, it can be for a variety of reasons that you are avoiding discussing things, avoiding disagreements, avoiding misunderstandings, whatever it is. At its heart, it is a lack of love, and it's a lack of concern and care for the other person, regardless of what your motivations might be, to have been pleasing to the Lord, to have been more honorable. You're actually living in a place of dishonor towards your spouse. And what you're doing by avoiding things is actually bringing a lot of damage. And what maybe what you have done, you thought would just change. Maybe you thought would improve with time. Maybe you've even been praying for the Lord to help your spouse to open up, or your spouse to not be so argumentative, or whatever it was. You've tried to elevate the situation. You've tried to make it better. You've tried to do what you thought was going to make it better. And it could be that you were even pursuing your spouse. But in reality, a lot of times this can actually make it worse, especially if it's been happening for years. Obviously, what you've been doing has not changed the dynamics. So how do we change this? How do we get out of this avoidance cycle that so many couples are in? Well, in many ways, it is going back to our faith. It is going back to an understanding of how we're uniquely made, and that you are not the arbiter of all things true and right, and that there are blind spots that you have and that you do not see, and you could not possibly see from your spouse's perspective. Yet the Lord has brought the two of you together to live life together, to raise your children together as gospel partners. And so really the key to getting out of this vicious cycle is humility and humbling yourselves, active humility, an active of state of humbling yourself before the Lord and each other, so that you can move out of just essentially living for selfish desires. Because avoidance is actually looking to your own desires. It is putting what you want first, and that is that you want to go have fun, or you want to get out of this, or you want to just move on from it and gloss over it, sweep it under the carpet and not deal with it. And in reality, this is actually causing a lot of damage. And so we go back to, what is it that Jesus taught us? He said, this is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. And my goodness, Christian friends, the best and most important place to love your neighbor as yourself, the second greatest commandment, is in the context of your own marriage. And so this is a place and a time right now for humility And I'd encourage you to go before each other, first of all, before the Lord, and maybe together before the Lord, that you go and you humble yourselves so that you can change out of this vicious cycle. But here's what I'd say is that there are many out there that have been in this place of avoidance for years and years and years and years. And oftentimes when people come to us, it's like the pressure cooker has already reached max capacity and the steam is starting to blow. And it's about ready to blow as a whole marriage. And if you're out there and you realize that this steam has really built up and you don't know how to get the pressure off, or you realize that this vicious cycle is so deep seated that it's not just going to change on itself, then I'd encourage you to book a complimentary breakthrough call with us. You can do that at turnaroundmarriage.com/call. And what we're going to do on that call is talk about what has not been working in your marriage. Talk about that vicious cycle and what things have looked like for you. And then also talk about where you hope it could be and where you dream it would be and what intimacy would look like if you had everything on the table and there were no secrets and you were not sitting there wondering, where is my spouse's heart? What is their thinking towards me? What are their beliefs about me? And instead be able to really have everything out there so that you could just have connection and closeness and intimacy, which is not possible when you're sweeping things under the rug. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about a real strategy to move from X to Y. And my goodness, my friends, it can be so beautiful when we get out of these deep-seated ruts and get into the place of nourishing the marriage the way that God has designed it. So if that's you, I'd encourage you to go to turnaroundmarriage.com/call, and we will talk really soon. But for the rest of you, I pray that this would be an encouragement to you in your marriage. Today is the day to impact change in your own marriage. Let's stop sweeping things under the carpet, which is essentially brick by brick, building a wall of disconnection between you and your spouse. It's time for things to change. Let that change start today. Lots of love, my friends. Talk soon.